The Oracle of Luna is a podcast with me, Bridget Engels, as your host. Here we have conversations with real live, present-day goddesses who are actively and courageously doing their magical work in the world. Each episode is a bewitching journey with relevant discussions on topics such as Wiccan pagan spirituality, writing, culture, magical practices, art, ritual, and the craft in its many forms.
Welcome to the Oracle of Luna podcast. Today's guest is cultural activist and radical doll maker and writer, Jude Lally. Welcome, Jude.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's get right into it. You call yourself a cultural activist. How did this role come about for you, and what does it entail?
Many years ago, when I was at uni, I wrote my thesis on the goddess Bridget, and I interviewed women in Scotland. Some of them led spiritual traditions, others ran grassroots community projects, and I identified these women as being cultural activists. Each woman had a relationship to Bridget, who in herself, you could actually see her as a cultural activist. But what these women were doing was they were embodying their values and they were living them. And within the projects they worked with, they were empowering people in their communities. So I'm trying to live up to that. It's like I'm striving to do that, to embody my values. And I feel when you've got an earth-based spirituality, what is the point unless you're stepping up and speaking out against all the devastation humans cause? And sometimes, even going down to examining the role that we actually play ourselves in it. But anyway, to give you an example, which would be helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, so the values of your tradition is what helps you through hard times, really,
Yes.
So mine is partly a Celtic culture, and so keening is a traditional way of dealing with deep grief when somebody dies. Now,
Right.
I'm sure you'll agree we live in a death-phobic culture.
Yes.
So we're not particularly great at dealing with grief, and I'm sure you can probably resonate that we can get totally overwhelmed by all the grief for everything that's going on.
Yes.
So I use keening to address that grief. It's like when somebody dies, it doesn't get rid of the grief, but we can change our relationship to it. And the act of keening is very cathartic. So
Yes.
it can start to letting it all out. We can start to change how we're feeling, maybe be not so overwhelmed with it. And when we're not so overwhelmed, it can help us engage again and make a difference, even if it feels small and insignificant. We're doing something.
Right. And it's very healing. I did a little research on keening, and it's actually in ancient Celtic times, the role of the bard would sing the deceased onto the next life or into the next realm, and then that role was taken on by the priest in Christianity, and then now it's primarily the wise woman or the keening woman who guides the soul from at the threshold from this realm to the next. It's a beautiful healing and cathartic, purifying practice.
Yeah, and it's mainly, I mean, it doesn't exist anymore really in a traditional way, but
Right.
there is a resurge of it, and lots of people are using it in different ways. And you know, there's I've read that it was most likely pre-Celtic, and it was always a woman's role. That was one of the main reasons the church wanted to kind of squash it in a way.
Right.
So so that's what I'm doing with it, is taking that's how I see cultural activists, taking something in the tradition and using it for the good, for the good of us
Right.
and everybody
For
else that
present time.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's awesome. All right. So who's influenced you the most on your journey?
Um, who? So I mentioned there, being at university, I studied human ecology
Okay.
in Glasgow, and one of my tutors was Alistair McIntosh. He's a Scottish environmental activist and writer, and
Okay.
even today, he really inspires me within the work that he does. You've probably heard of, Joanna Macy,
Mm,
environmental activist. Now, the work that she does in the programs she uses, I love how she shares that with the world and, encourages people to adapt some of those for, your own use. And I've adapted some of her work for my use. So she's a very inspiring woman. Here in America, Lila June, she's a Navajo activist, she's an educator
okay.
and a singer, really inspiring woman. And, I love nature writers, Scottish writers. One guy, example, Jim Crumley, he's a wonderful. So it takes me back to, that connection with the land.
Sure.
I love researchers who are doing wonderful work in women's history, like Max Dashu.
Yes,
Wow.
absolutely. I met her a couple years ago and she signed my book, one of her books. It was fascinating. It's a great
Phew.
lecture.
Yes, I managed a lecture once. So much scope and depth. It's like
Yes, great
wonderful.
detail.
Yeah. And fiction writers, there's people who tap into sort of like layers of time. Um, The Gathering Night is a fiction book set in Scotland in the Mesolithic. Margaret Ethelstone, I think that's how you pronounce her name. But
Uh-huh.
great. She did so much research into how people lived at that time, how they moved around the islands,
Yeah.
and so yeah, really
Awesome.
inspiring.
That's on my reading list.
Oh, well, I definitely recommend it. Wonderful scenes of ritual in there as well. And like, growing up, books that are written for young adults in Britain, writers like Susan Cooper, Rosemary Sutcliffe, I love that. And, people that are doing great work with decolonization, especially for settlers, folks like Peggy Eyre, who wrote Ancient Spirit Rising, it's
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
really, so yeah, really inspiring book.
Okay. Lovely. So Scotland is your birthplace, correct?
Yes.
And it has been a very special place for you to connect with your spirituality. Can you tell us a little bit more about Scotland and how it influenced you?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the Loch Lomond area of Scotland, so it's kind of technically like the lowlands, It's
Mhm.
obviously it's at the bottom of the mountainous region in the Highlands. And when we were my dad would always take us out walking. We were always out walking the hills. And it must have been when I was about 11, 12-ish, don't really, round about that age,
Uh-huh.
I really began to notice when you were up the hills, it was there was a different quality to everything up there. The
Mm.
silence was so rich, it was almost
Mm.
it sounds ridiculous. It was almost deafening. It was like it
Mm.
was so rich and there
Uh-huh.
was something different up there. It felt like, you'd moved into a different world.
Like a time out of time.
Absolutely, that was it. And so, that really engaged me, as in I wanted to go back and, watch the birds, just and soak into that feeling out of that. And so I feel that's how my conversation with the land started. And I've always been fascinated. I used to play this sort of game when I was little that I would like, blink my eyes and like the cars would disappear and the roads and the houses and like how
Yeah.
did it look, without all of modernity really?
Yes.
And could you see the people that used to live there? And so it was almost like, aware
Mm.
of those layers of time. Like you say, it
Right.
was almost as if worlds flowed into the other.
And you were engaging your your imagination.
Oh, I am all about imagination. So yeah, and that imagination kept going, and that relationship developed over the years. And I'd find myself encountering the same feelings, inspirations, and it was almost as if over the decades it became tangible, and it was almost like that energy in certain places was a person, although they might not be fully human. And
Hmm.
that and so again, that conversation with the land. And over the years I've been drawn to keep returning to certain places, the
Mhm.
Isle of Egg, and places like the Isle of Oronsay, and they've got great Mesolithic shell methods. Remember that book we were talking about, The Gathering Night?
Yes, yes.
I, it's she's probably talking about Oronsay because they were such a big feature in the Mesolithic landscape. So tapping into all that inspiration of people as well, and
Hmm.
so yeah, that's
And you could probably feel the energy within the land, and their energy actually probably reverberating into the land and the, like you said, the shell middens. And yeah, it just sounds very magical.
it's like you're in the same place, but
Yeah.
it's like you're so separated by time, but also they saw the world complete. We're almost alien compared to them. It's like how they saw the world and how we view it. And to
Hmm.
me, it's trying to make that connection of can I get a hint of how they once interacted with the world, even although it was a different place then.
Yeah. Yeah. But you're reviving an ancient um folklore magic.
Yeah, trying to,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. So, what is the Sisterhood of the Antlers? And how do you intertwine ceremony and magic with present day reality?
um Maybe I could give you a couple of examples, like just go
Sure,
round the wheel with the ancestral mother. So
sure.
obviously this time of year right now we're in the season, moving towards the season of Imbolc. Bridget comes back into the world, and I often find it a very unsure and unsettling time. And because the sun has been reborn, but really it feels like it's the darkest of the
Yes.
dark,
Yeah.
and yeah, I feel that can bring up, it can be quite unsettling. And if you were to say, looking at last year for 2020, it almost felt that we were in an entire year of Imbolc. And so
Right.
I would say ritual at that sort of this time of year would be an act of hope. So Bridget's bringing that promise of change in the coming months, but rather than wishful thinking, if we don't, I feel we need to do something with our hope. If we actually root it in something, in action of what maybe the change that we want to see in ourselves or relationships or the world, it flourishes rather than a wishful thinking that might actually just, not actually
Right.
manifest at all. Yeah.
Right. Active magic is very
Yeah.
different than just reading or talking about it. Actually doing it and engaging consistently.
Yeah,
Whole different level to it.
exactly. And
And power.
so, exactly, all those things is like engaging with them. And so, if we jump to like maybe Beltane, because we were talking about the shell mounds, um, so there's almost like another sisterhood, because I'm female, so obviously I'm looking at these people, the relationship of them as women.
Right.
And so this figure is Sial. It's like that idea of the way they ritually moved round the landscape in relation to what foods were available. So
Right. They would
and
migrate with the
yeah, within, and sometimes maybe coming over to you didn't find so many people on the mainland at that time because it was just such a huge forest. But they would come over there for maybe to hunt deer. And so, on the Celtic wheel, they talk about fertility and desire, but what about our own individual hopes,
right.
desires in
How do we
life?
make it relevant into for us?
Exactly. And longing as well. Longing comes into that because, for example, if we have a longing for to live in real harmony with the earth, um, again, it's like it really encourages us to do something about it. So
Yeah.
next festival would be summer solstice. Again, obviously this isn't too far away from there. Really inspired by female warriors, lots of inspiration from the islands actually. The Isle of Egg, I do a retreat there most years,
How
and
do you
it's called
how do you spell that?
it's Eigg. It's actually a Norse name. You would think that, it might be in Gaelic, but I think the word egg itself is actually Norse, and it means the island of the big women.
Oh,
And you
fascinating.
exactly. So there, and that would have been in Gaelic. Um, so yeah, there's stories of female warriors. If you go to the neighbouring island of Skye, Skaha is a Celtic warrior from Skye. Up to the most westernly isle, there's stories of the Amazon house. So ritual at that time is imagining a time out of patriarchy, of women, of dreaming and planning together. And I don't just mean, you know, a partnership culture, working, towards a partnership culture. Who in our communities are we fighting from? We fighting with? Who are we
Hmm.
almost? Who
Almost
are we
gathering
working?
strength from each other in ritual.
Yes, yes, exactly. And it's like, rather than doing all this on your own, doing it within community. And
Yes, something that we're missing today, where we're all
yeah,
well, especially now with the pandemic, we're all so isolated. But
no, that is
yeah,
absolutely true. And
but
I
even
feel,
without the pandemic, we can isolate. Modern day civilization with technology, we're all pretty isolated. But um, anyway,
and that is true though. That is almost like one of the sickness, the dis-ease of the Western world is
yes,
this aloneness, really.
yes, yeah,
So
permeates in our whole culture.
exactly. So maybe if we jump to winter solstice, you remember that story I was saying about, being a kid, being up the hills,
Yeah. Hmm.
hill walking. Well, I also used to have this sort of daydream about always seeing this something moving in the landscape, and it took me a lot, and it go into dreams as well, and it took me a while to realize that I was almost dreaming about huge big herds of reindeer and the people that followed the reindeer, and they would be, some of the first peoples coming into Scotland, and small fragments of reindeer antlers have been found in the local area, um, obviously thousands of years old. And so, there's figures there like Ellen of the Ways. Uh,
Yeah.
I I relate to her, but I just don't know her by that name. And by no means is her story finished. It's an evolving story. And so I actually know this figure by She Who Runs with the Herd. And so if you dive into the imagination, you can imagine the people that are following the reindeer, the women getting together, having this ritual of shapeshifting, taking reindeer form and running with the herd. And
As
all
a
and
form
all
of magic, ceremonial magic to um, integrate their spirituality with the elk or the deer,
yeah,
reindeer.
with the reindeer, yeah, because the reindeer, as in with people who related to reindeer today, as in like being in those days when you think of they provided clothing, they provided,
Yes,
food.
everything.
Absolutely. And like things been made, everything was made from reindeer skin. So almost like, yeah, just that interaction with the herd on a sort of magical level. And there's another figure in there as well called the Old Antlered One. And she's almost this primordial creatrix. And so, that's their sort of rituals. And we can do that as well, just with the drum and like getting into that space.
Sure. Costume, drum, candles.
The works, you got it. And it's like, and so for one of the rituals I do at winter solstice is I'm more Irish than I am Scottish, and DNA is quite fascinating these days of what it can tell you. And from reading research of families whose fathers come from the west coast of Ireland, which my dad does come from the west coast of Ireland, a lot of those people have been there for thousands of years. And so
Right.
I love that connection to when you think of places like Newgrange, which came from in the winter solstice with the sun as it shines into Newgrange, there's
Mhm.
3 great bowls in Newgrange, and it's thought that bones of the ancestors could have been placed in those bones, and so that winter solstice sun, the rebirth was a blessing to that for them to, for their rebirth in the other world. So, the ritual there being, what would we put into those bowls that we wish to be reborn, really?
And a lot of it goes back to our intentions and getting in touch with our sacred magic and tapping into our magic and what we want to bring to the world. It's all
Yeah.
relevant, but in a totally different time.
Yeah, and to go back just to say, like, that gathering of the women doing the shapeshifting, that is the oldest sisterhood on the Ancestral Mothers of Scotland. So that's why I call, the Sisterhood of the Antlers, just that action of women getting together to support other women. What good can we do collectively together for each other,
Yes.
i- in community, in different levels of, yeah, so
And ourselves. Yeah. It's
absolutely.
healing in all ways and reverberates out into the world.
Exactly.
That's
And,
awesome.
and to and to even within the name just have that evocative, the sisterhood of the antlers. It's just inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so you are a prolific doll maker, and what interests and inspires you to do this?
I do feel like I have this need to create, and maybe I was affected by at school. I totally wanted to do art. I couldn't do still life, and so I wasn't allowed to do art.
Uh,
um, and I do believe, part of me believed that, but I'm over that. I am totally making up for those lost years. And
yeah.
I do see, we've all got ways of how we make sense. And doll making for me is a way to make sense of things. There is a mystery within it that I don't really want to explain. But it's almost like, when I'm making a doll that's related to a figure, it's almost like having a conversation between the worlds with them.
Yeah.
So, it holds those values and insights. And I love thinking about that as I make them.
Yeah. Well, it connects you to the divine.
Absolutely. And like, I kind of use the word like radical, like a radical doll maker. And
Yeah. What do you mean by that? Radical.
um, I am using like the etymology of the word. To,
Okay.
to be radical means to return to the root. And so I love that idea of we can choose our lineages and or however we work. So within doll making, I am holding the cords of a long tradition that goes back to those hands that made the women of Willendorf, and all the stick and stone balls, all the stick and stone dolls, that were made with little pieces of fur or whatever. But
Yeah. But those
they,
are used like used for sympathetic magic in ceremony. It sounds.
absolutely, absolutely. And so, I love that this idea of the radical doll maker just tapping into like way past modern times, but connected because those people still had intention in prayer when they
Yeah.
made a doll. And so do my hands when I make dolls. So love
Yeah.
that connection.
I love that it's connected to their survival as well as their spirituality. I find that extremely primal, but also just it's it's so effective and powerful as magic because it's so important to them. And I love that you weave in the ancient practices and are reviving that with your present day workshops and doll making. It's awesome. Love it.
Cute. And it's also, when I think of those people, really ancestors almost, it's like their relationship to land and like the closer I could ever get to just for a glimpse how they felt within their landscape, because they couldn't ever be separated from it, whereas
Right.
we live in very different times.
Very completely different. Yeah. So, how do you see your role evolving in the future then?
Um, I will be moving back to Scotland, and
Okay.
that'll be a big change. And I see myself doing the same thing, but obviously new partnerships. And I've always been interested in biodiversity, something Scotland really needs to work at. It's so nature depleted. In fact, the whole lot of the UK is so nature
Oh,
depleted. And, rewilding the land is part of, bringing back that biodiversity. And, if we look back to see, we used to have bears and wolves and we lost them.
yeah.
And we pretty much lost them in our stories, and we lost our relationship with them, and we lost their role in the landscape. And so, for all those things that we lost, did we ever lose part of ourselves, that our relationship to them? And how could we change that? How could we get that
Yeah.
relationship back? And
It's
there
almost
are
like
people.
cultural amnesia.
Exactly, and it happens very quickly. And
Yes.
so, I feel like with all, and there is people that want to bring bear and wolf back to Scotland, and I feel a rewilding of the land changes the land, but it also a rewilding of ourselves, because I feel most alive. The most alive I ever feel is out hill walking. It's like so, and
Yes.
so,
The
so.
connection to spirit through nature is something that's really prevalent here in the Pacific Northwest because we're all, we have the mountains and the ocean, and it's,
Yeah.
it's very prevalent here. But, when you're in the city or you're away from nature, you can be separated, and that's a huge loss and affects us all on a very deep level.
Yeah, and modern society just feels in our head, that disconnect really
Right.
just exists in our head, and when we're talking about land, it's like, I've been living here roughly 10 years, so
In the
you
US,
know yeah, and like, all white settlers are living on stolen land, and so
the
well,
ugly.
I've yeah, and I've been able to play a little part in helping women connect to their Celtic traditions. And, one woman in particular, Hilary Giovanni,
Uh-huh.
she took some of my classes, which in turn, she was doing this anyway. She really got into her personal decolonial work.
Uh-huh.
I mean, she's a ninth generation settler, so there's a lot of history, a
Yeah.
lot of ugly stuff in there. And, she really went into it. And so she's now, and I love that partnership. She's really inspiring me. And like, if anybody's, doing this work, she's got a wonderful interview she did. The website's called Nature Revolutionaries,
Mm,
and her talk is Decolonizing Ancestral Memory. And
mm,
it's a great
fascinating.
story and model for people that might be doing this work. And she works in the Southwest. Her neighbors would be Navajo,
Uh-huh.
um, Dene people. And so, we were able to do one of the one of her neighbors who is Navajo is, they're having who isn't having huge
Yeah.
problems with COVID, but native communities are particularly, these people are living in real poverty. So
Yeah.
just been able to help, one of her this guy in particular, we made this connection of ancestral connections. So I'm working with the kayak, and he was working with one of the figures in his cosmology was changing woman. So we just put this raffle together, and we were able to raise some funds to give him some money to help get water and some food out to the elders in his community. So even just building little partnerships that way.
Yeah. It's like reweaving a web.
Absolutely. And in listening, how can we actively
Yes.
help? So, whatever we can do.
Yeah. And creating a community and resources together is a good way to start building that bridge of, you know, the past to what we can help with present and into the future.
Exactly.
So, what are some of your upcoming workshops or classes or plans for the future?
Um, Obviously, sort of teaching stuff is obviously online due to COVID.
Yeah.
I've been doing a wonderful kayak circle that started in October, goes through to March. And so each month we're just learning her stories through
Oh,
inspiration and art. That's been a really, I like, again, because we can't meet, I usually meet with women throughout the dark of the year.
right.
And so, doing this one online has been wonderful. I've just launched Gathering at Bridget's Hearth.
Yes, I saw that on your newsletter. Looks amazing.
So there's loads of aspects of Bridget in there. I feel I've just barely even scratched the surface, but we're going to gather 3 times, looking at her creativity, healing, and activism.
Mm.
So I'm looking forward to that.
That's a two-part workshop that takes place in February, or
No, it's like everything. This is purely online. It's like I
yeah,
call it gathering at our hearth, but really it's like we're gathering via Zoom.
yeah, yeah. And it takes
But
place in February, basically.
actually, registration is open, and our first gathering will be Sunday the 24th because our I kind of look at Imbolc as the season rather than just a
Sure.
day, but it gives us opportunity to talk about Imbolc traditions so people can actually, bring them into their own practice and do them themselves. So,
That's
so
good. That's good because people often gather, together. But like you say, we have to gather online and then go into our little isolated caves.
exactly. And, but at least we get that, Zoom at least
Yeah,
gives us a bit of a
connection.
connection.
Yeah.
I think in March I'm going to be launching Creating a Meaningful Menopause, and it's creative tools for that journey because,
Hmm.
I am
Powerful.
starting that journey.
Yep. Hmm.
And, quite often we have physical things that we're like, okay, we are heading that way. And it's like a wake up in a way. So,
Yeah, it's a major, major change. And, there's not a lot of role models here in the US, good role models for menopause and in our, culture and our, magazines and
yes.
social media. We have this neurosis of being in a perpetual youth culture and never aging and getting plastic surgery and boob jobs so we don't look old. And it's so wrong. And we need to develop tools to age wisely and naturally. And so I think
Yes.
that's awesome. Very, very nice.
And so, we might look at something like, what's going to be a symbol as you go through this process. It's like maybe you want to call in a midwife, or but that could be like a guide or a goddess figure or some kind of somebody that's spiritually inspiring.
Yeah.
And of course, looking at different ceremonies because it is a rite of passage,
Yes.
and
Yes.
then ultimately that journey takes us to Crone. So
Right. And which is a very powerful, powerful chapter in our lives. And
yeah.
active. We're not going to be sitting on the sidelines anymore. We're active crones. Power.
Exactly.
We have a
And
lot
it's like,
to say.
and a lot of people want to mark that. So, do people want to, how do they want to, just generating ideas if people want ceremony for that. And I'm
Yeah.
looking at the whole thing as a map with that personal symbol, with your sort of midwife and, going through that rite of passage really. So,
Yeah. Awesome. That's wonderful. Um,
Uh, I've got one other. I'll probably do two more. I'll just quickly say what those are. Um, I designed Celtic Soul prayer beads, and so I'll probably do a course on how do you use them, how do you bring them into personal practice, and Yeah, and I often do the Wheel of the Year by introducing the stories of these ancestral mothers, and we explore it through art and guided meditation.
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah.
quite a lot. And also your doll making, right? I mean, you're continuing with that always.
Yes, and it's like, I think this year I've been challenging myself, especially over Christmas. Just it's great to just keep evolving, like trying different ways and like just different ways of the design and things like that. And so, as I said, I am hoping to move back to Scotland this year.
I hope you do. I mean, sounds like, quite a move, I'm sure.
Yes, lots of lists, and obviously COVID allowing, and I'm writing a book on the ancestral mothers.
Yeah,
So,
that's awesome. Yay. But that's
but
a
it's
lot,
all
as I know, I'm a writer, so it takes
yes.
a lot of effort and to carve out the time and
You've said it. It's almost like it is. It is. And once you start, you're fine. But sometimes it's just those constant interruptions. So yes, I'm really working on find some time in the morning that I'm not going to be disturbed.
yeah. Great. Well, it sounds all really exciting. You got a full plate and a full calendar. um, I honor you and just think you're an outstanding, extraordinary woman, and just really honor that you keep the old traditions alive and reclaim them. And you're a present day goddess. So I'm so honored to have you. So lastly, do you have a website or social media that people can find out more about you?
Yep, the website is pathoftheancestralmothers.com, and you can sign up for the newsletter there. Facebook, two main groups. I There's the Sisterhood of the Antlers and Daughter of the Kalyak. Um, Also, I do have a public, there's a group on creating a meaningful menopause, so that's fun to just hear
Uh-huh.
people's different experiences and things. Also, on the website, there's a list of the online courses, but I also do a free online course which I just do a couple of hours on Zoom at each festival with stories of the ancestral mothers. So um, that's there on the website as well. Etsy shop, I generally update it on the last Sunday of the month, and that's called Celtic Soulcraft. So the next update will be the last Sunday of January.
Wonderful. Wow. Lots of links. And the Daughters of the Kaliak, is that the best one for your rituals, your monthly
Um,
seasonal?
Really? Um, I actually do have a Facebook page. The other two are groups. I do have Ancestral Mothers of Scotland.
Okay.
That's a sort of public page, but I really share quite. The Daughters of the Kalyak is obviously far more focused to conversations around the Kalyak herself.
Okay.
The and so yeah, I share quite similar things in the groups.
Okay. Well, it sounds like if they initially go to your website, then you can figure out all the other Facebook
Yeah,
links.
it's all there. Yes.
Okay. Wonderful. And you're also on Instagram, so that's wonderful.
Yep, I think it's Jude_Lally.
Okay, excellent. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on my podcast, and it's been an honor. And we've learned so much about what you do, and it's very magical and powerful. So, I wish you luck with all your various future endeavors, and keep on witching.
And thank you for the opportunity. It was fun to talk to you.
Welcome, and may you walk with the goddess. Blessed be.
Thank you, Bridget.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.